All right, looks like we still have a few folks joining us, but we are going to go ahead and get started. Hello and welcome to First Bank's Center for Family-Owned Businesses webinar series. I'm Mike Vanderveld and I'll be your facilitator. Today, we explore the question, can employers require COVID vaccinations? Just a quick reminder, the lines are muted, but at any time, please send us your questions through the webinar tool. All right, let me jump over to slide number 2 and let's meet our presenters. Starting off today, we'll hear from Mr. Jacob Herschend from the Marsh McLennan Agency. After that, Charles Jellinek from the Bryan, Leighton, Paisner law firm will weigh in. Their complete bios can be found in the attachment section of the webinar tool. Now, before we dive in, I would like to draw your attention to a Paycheck Protection Program webinar we just scheduled for this Friday. Hot off the press, there's new information about second draw PPP loans. If interested, please check your email and register for the session. All right, I'm going to flip it over to slide number 3 and welcome in Mr. Herschend.
Hello, everybody. My name is Jacob Herschend, and as we just introduced, I'm with the Marsh McLennan Agency here in St. Louis, Missouri, in the Upper Midwest region. Go ahead and go to the next page. So I wanted to do just a kind of a little bit of history on the vaccine and how we're kind of where we are right now and where we're kind of going and why it's kind of important that we really kind of keep in mind that why a vaccine is important and what it's done for us as a country and the world. If we kind of look at the various diseases that have kind of been out there and why these things are incredible for us, we look at measles. We look at the morbidity rate. We look at 530,000 cases, and of those cases now reported in 2019, we had 1,287. But then you also look down at polio. You look at 16,316. What that really means is that vaccines work well if they do it. If we make sure we get everyone to get the vaccine, and that's really important for us to just kind of understand as we kind of move forward. Can we go to the next slide? So, keeping in mind how vaccines, that first slide that we looked at, that was 40, 50, 60 years ago when people started getting the vaccines like that. You start looking at people getting the vaccines now, and you look at, let's say, the flu, and you break it down in the age range of 18 to 49-year-olds, only 38% of the population is getting the vaccine in that bracket. You go above 50 to 64-year-olds, 1 out of 2 is getting the vaccine. And then if you go to the flu for 65 plus, it's 70% and above. What's important there to understand is that we feel that, and we go to the next slide. We feel that we need to get to what's called a herd immunity, and that's going to be around 60%. And so we need to have a much higher rate of folks getting the COVID vaccine to really get to that spot. And then these are just kind of studies that statistics that we found throughout the past year. In May 2nd of last year, we estimated the antibody count was right around 20% in New York City, and it kind of goes down from various places down in those spots. Go to the next slide, please. Now, as we're moving towards people getting vaccinated and getting towards that herd immunity, Pfizer was the first one that came out with their first batch, and there was a 2-shot system, and then Moderna is coming out with theirs, and then Johnson & Johnson is coming out with theirs. It is the hope, if everyone gets the vaccine the way it should and the rollout speeds up to where it's in a little bit better, faster spot, we're looking at hopefully getting to a herd immunity maybe in May. But it just really depends on how everyone's getting the vaccine or not. And that is why, go to the next slide, please. that is why we're having this conversation. So here's some information that you should know about the just about the Pfizer vaccine. It's a 2-dose, and Moderna is a 2-dose system. It's 95% effective. In the study that they did it with about 38,000 folks monitored over 2 months. There are some side effects, but they're side effects of what you're going to feel if you had COVID. You're going to feel headaches and chills and maybe a fever, some fatigue, but those are all normal symptoms, and then you will have immunity from the disease. Go to the next slide, please. So what the federal government asked each state to do was to come up with their vaccine distribution plan. The CDC also recommended that all of the healthcare workers and first responders and high-risk population get the vaccine first. And if you wanted to find out exactly what each state is going to do, you can actually Google for the state of Missouri where I live, you can Google COVID-19 vaccine distribution plan for Missouri, and it'll pull up the exact plan at how it's working out right now. So there is a difference between essential workers and employees of essential businesses. And that's kind of important to understand, because if you think about it from essential workers versus employees of essential businesses, the vaccine distribution plan uses the term essential workers to refer to healthcare workers, first responders, and any other workers of any assigned high priority for distribution. It does not mean all employees of an employer are deemed essential, an essential business. So go to the next slide. As we kind of talked about this earlier, the state and local governments are going to require vaccination for certain employee groups. Now, I'm going to have Charles talk about this just a little bit, because I know that we're going to get into a little bit of the legal side of all of this.
Thank you, Jacob. Just as a quick high-level overview regarding some key employment and labor issues with respect to vaccines and mandating such by employers, there's a couple quick high-level things we're going to talk about at this part of the program, and then I'm going to come back in some greater detail and talk about the laws that impact the concept of a vaccination program and how you'll need to navigate those very carefully. So first and foremost, you're going to have to allow for accommodation. Even if an employer decides that it wants to require all employees to be vaccinated, there are laws that implicate whether or not you can require everyone to do so. The key ones being those with disabilities are protected by the Americans with Disabilities Act, and employers will need to make exceptions for those folks who cannot, because of medical reasons, take the vaccine. And also, as we know, there is an exception for folks because of religious reasons under Title VII of the Civil Rights Act of 1964. If someone doesn't want to be vaccinated, or their sincerely held religious beliefs don't permit them to engage in traditional medicine, the one we classically hear of are like Christian Scientists, but there are others as well. The policy or program that the employer implements will have to take that into account. And also, there's some additional information too. There's a number of commentators out there right now opining that because this is an emergency use authorization for vaccines and it hasn't gone through the entire rigorous FDA process, that some folks are saying that the FDA requirements of actually informing people as they're being asked to take the vaccination that they don't have to take it because of the emergency use status in which this came out, that should be part of the process as well. And of course, if you're a unionized employer, you may have an employment contract or even separate employment contracts with employees that prevent vaccination. So all high-level concerns that we'll talk about a little bit later as we get into the second half of the program. Next slide. So this is not a commercial for me or any other labor and employment lawyer out there, but these are not small issues to be trifled with. So There's a lot of folks who have very strong opinions on what should and should not be done with respect to vaccination, but because of the issues I just highlighted and some others I'm going to talk about in a little bit more detail, we strongly recommend that before you implement any type of vaccination program, whether mandatory or voluntary, or whether you consider taking some sort of job action regarding an employee who refuses to vaccinate or denying them access to your premises, that you speak with a labor and employment lawyer. It's just that sensitive an issue. It's in flux. Things are currently not certain regarding all of this, and you're going to want to have the benefit of counsel and advice before you move forward. And some considerations in that regard before requiring vaccination. Think about the supply in your area. It's one thing to say, we're going to go ahead and implement a mandatory vaccination program or policy for our workplace, but it's another thing to do that if there's not vaccines available. I mean, currently the vaccine's not going to be widely available, as Jacob said, except for essential folks. Until then, they're going to be distributed based on priority: healthcare workers, seniors, those with pre-existing conditions, and others in vulnerable populations. So therefore, we employment lawyers are largely recommending to employers to take a wait approach before actually establishing a mandatory program or even a voluntary program. Wait until the vaccine supply is actually widely available in your area. Also think about what you're currently doing with respect to other vaccinations. If you're currently not requiring the flu, but all of a sudden you do with COVID, are you going to be able to justify those differences? Or do you want to have a mandatory vaccination program across a variety of different workplace illnesses that you want to take care of? Certainly considerations of employee relations, how you communicate will dictate really whether or not you have issues coming out of this. The law is pretty clear, and we're going to talk about that in the second part of the program, but how we engage with our workforce, communicate what we're doing, explain to our employees why we're doing what we're doing is going to be really half the battle of making sure we get uptake on our programs if you implement one. Also, you're going to want to coordinate with your healthcare provider regarding cost, how this is going to happen. And also, you're going to want to think about incentives. The voluntary hunk of it is just as important as the mandatory hunk, which we'll talk about as well in the second half of the program. Jacob?
Go back one slide really quickly. So as far as the wellness incentive versus required vaccination, the wellness incentive is, keep in mind the smoking cessation that you have that's out there. Like there is a financial component to that for your employees, and they can either choose to do it or not do it. And if there is a choice there, and if they choose not to do it, you can't go back to them and say, no, you have to do it after that. We have to make a choice between requiring and also providing a wellness incentive. So you have to do either one or the other. Go to the next slide, please. We also have on our website at marshmma.com, we have a COVID-19 vaccine employer fact sheet and what you need to know today. On that site, you can get all the general information that we just kind of covered during this process, which is great. And also, if you go to the next slide, you can sign up for resources at Marsh MMA as well, and you can get updated in real time. All of these updates can be sent into your inbox so you can have them at your fingertips. I thank you very much for letting me talk today about all of this. And if you have any questions, please feel free to reach out to me or email me or give me a call. Thank you.
All right, this is Charles again, and since I jumped in the middle of Jacob's program, let me just introduce myself. I'm Charles Jellinek. I'm a partner in the labor and employment practice at Bryan, Leighton, Paisner. And if you're wondering, am I the only employer out there that's been thinking about these issues? The answer is absolutely not. I cannot tell you how many telephone calls I'm getting on a daily basis from employers all over the country saying, what are we going to do in this space? What should we be doing? What should we be thinking about? So kudos to you for joining this program today and thinking about it. So my agenda for today is I'm going to do a brief overview of the state and federal laws and EEOC guidance that are largely driving this question about vaccination programs in the workplace. And then we're going to go through some considerations for employers I should point out this is going to be U.S. focused. If you have operations outside the United States, the laws in every other country are approaching this in a variety of different ways. As you might guess, in Europe, with a lot of more pro-employee, pro-labor laws and regulations on the books, they're taking a much more restrictive view on what can be mandated versus what cannot. But we're a little bit more loose here in the United States, and the EEOC has just given some very good and helpful guidance, I think, on how the employer will approach this. So we're going to talk about the large kind of overview approaches, mandatory versus voluntary, whether the employer should be distributing or having an independent distribution of the vaccine, and then thinking about timing. Next slide. So just quick overview regarding the laws that are impacting the advice I'm going to chat about today and this issue generally. First is the Americans with Disabilities Act, which probably most on this webinar know. This is the law, the federal law, that prohibits discrimination on the basis of disability. And in addition to prohibiting employers from taking adverse employment action against folks who are disabled, the ADA has a couple other requirements. One of those, it limits the circumstance under which employers can collect medical information from employees and require employees to submit to medical exams. And it requires employers to affirmatively provide qualified employees with reasonable accommodations if they have disabilities, unless it would present an undue burden on the employer, and obviously to maintain confidentiality of employee medical information. Title VII of the Civil Rights Act of 1964 is the kind of granddaddy of all of our employment discrimination laws passed in 1964. This is the one that prohibits discrimination in the classes that we're largely familiar with: race, gender, national origin. But in Title VII is also religion. You cannot discriminate on the basis of religion. And much like the Americans with Disabilities Act, if somebody has a bona fide religious belief that requires that they not undertake certain medical things or other requirements in the workplace, the employer must engage in a process of accommodation and dialogue with the employee to accommodate a sincerely held religious belief. The next law that impacts what we're going to talk about today is the Genetic Information Non-Discrimination Act. This law is a federal law that relates to the employer's collection and use of quote-unquote genetic information, which includes information about an individual's genetic test, the genetic tests of an individual's family members, and it also prohibits employers from using genetic information in order to make decisions and acquiring employees' genetic information except for in some very narrow circumstances. The National Labor Relations Act is the country's federal labor law, which governs employee relations in the labor context. And this applies to both unionized and non-unionized workforces because it provides protections for certain employees' pre-organization activities and their right to engage in protected concerted activity. And then, of course, all over the country, there's similar and corresponding state and local anti-discrimination laws and laws that impact this issue. Next slide, please. So the overview of the legal landscape here, and historically, the EEOC had provided guidance regarding what employers could, should, ought to do in this space regarding mandatory vaccination programs. And this predated COVID. We've had guidance for many years going back to the swine flu and bird flu and all the other kind of larger, pandemic flus that had occurred in the past. And the EEOC had previously recommended that employers not mandate and that they were encouraged to adopt voluntary vaccine program as a consequence of the concerns I just mentioned regarding folks with disabilities and religious considerations under Title VII. The EEOC has taken a more nuanced approach with its most recent December 2020 guidance for the COVID situation. And I think the severity of this pandemic, as well as the EEOC very early on in this pandemic declaring this a pandemic and saying that it would be something that employers can operate around and engage in policy making around outside of some of the ADA's constrictures. Early on, you could really tell in this pandemic, EEOC was taking a different approach. And so their most recent guidance, it doesn't say one way or the other whether employers should adopt mandatory, voluntary, or otherwise. But it does also reject the notion that a vaccine is per se a medical examination under the Americans with Disabilities Act, and also rejects the notion that a vaccine, even some that are out there now being used to vaccinate against COVID-19 with the RNA technology, is per se genetic information under the Genetic Information Non-Discrimination Act. So important guidance. I'm not going to go into it in great detail here other than talk about its impact, but it's certainly worth reading. You can certainly tap into the Google machine, EEOC COVID-19 vaccine guidance, and you're going to pop it right up. It'll be the first hit when you do that if you want more information regarding that. So next slide. So with those high-level legal issues in mind, what are the different approaches? Well, the large ones are really, should we implement a mandatory program or should we implement a voluntary program? But of course, before you even think about doing that, if you are a small business or a small employer and you can continue to work in a remote environment, a teleworking arrangement, or engage in all the things we've been doing as far as a different approach to business, and it's not going to adversely impact operations, you might consider doing that before even taking the step of thinking about a vaccine program. I had a dialogue with a client the other day that it's a pure office operation. They have no manufacturing, nobody has to be there. It's a 16 small person, 16-person company, and they told me that, look, we're thinking about a vaccine program. And I said, why are you doing that? And they're like, well, to get people back in the office. And I asked, well, how's your productivity been? They said, we haven't missed a beat. We're having our best year ever. Our people are working fine from home. And I said, well, we can talk about a vaccine program. I'm happy to do that. I'm always happy to get a billable hour from any client. But do you really need that right now? I mean, if you're continuing to operate and it's not absolutely essential that you get back into the workplace, maybe this is an issue we can talk about and you can be ready to approach when you want to. But if it's not something you have to do, there are certainly less risky approaches, and you can continue to operate business as usual. Of course, there are some employers that cannot do that. They absolutely need to get back into the workplace, and it's essential that they do so. And so let's talk about some of the different arrangements as far as mandatory versus voluntary. Next slide. So let's get some high-level concepts out there right away. So the question, when I'm sitting in my office and I get a vaccine question from a client, it usually comes like this. They call and they say, hey, can I, as an employer, require my employees to obtain a vaccine once it's available? And I say, well, if by require you mean, can you refuse entry into your premises or your property, into your workplace, to an employee who refuses to get a vaccine or doesn't get vaccinated? The answer to that question is yes. So they say, well, what if somebody won't get it? Can I terminate them? Can I just fire them? The answer to that, of course, is no, for a variety of reasons, which we're going to talk about. So the answer, the high-level answer is yes. You can say we're not going to let someone in and come into our premises, given that this is a pandemic. It is certainly something that can impact the rest of the workforce, as we know. You can have this requirement. Now, remember, having that requirement without the exceptions will be found to be illegal. A blanket mandatory vaccination program will be determined to be illegal if it doesn't contain exceptions for employees who have a disability-based reason to object, an employee who has a sincerely held religious belief to object, and for those folks who work in states that have individual state laws, and there are a handful that prohibit the mandatory vaccination of employees, your policy is going to be illegal. So on its face, it has to provide for, if you're going to have a mandatory vaccination program, it's going to have to provide for these exceptions. And these exceptions must be individualized. They have to be, just like we always do under the Americans with Disabilities Act, this has to be an individualized review based on the employee's circumstances as to whether or not, an accommodation can be granted. So in the circumstance that I just chatted with you about the 16-person office-only environment where somebody has worked perfectly fine from home, if that person says, look, I have a disability or a religious-based reason, and I can't come in, can we accommodate that? The answer is probably going to be yes. I mean, it's going to be the standard kind of ADA analysis we always do. Is this going to create an undue burden or a hardship on the employer to grant a work from home to someone who has a disability or religious-based reason? The answer is probably no. But what if you're a small manufacturer and you have 15 employees working in your manufacturing facility, and the work that goes on there by your frontline workers has to be done there, and somebody who is a machine operator who works right next to another machine operator as part of a process or an assembly line says, well, I don't want to get the vaccine. Again, that's going to be a very individualized analysis. If they say, I don't want to get it, you can certainly refuse to have them enter your premises. But what if they say, well, I have a disability-based reason, and I've been working for the last 6 months with a mask on, and now you're telling me the mask isn't good enough, and I have to get the vaccine, or you're not going to let me come in. How's that going to play out? Well, every single circumstance is different. So I'm not going to give you a black and white answer on questions like that, because they're all gray, and they require the employee's individual disability circumstances, the setup of your office, your manufacturing floor, your facility, whether or not there can be things done short of requiring the vaccine for someone who has an exception for disability or religious-based reasons. Obviously, if your workforce is unionized, you're going to have to discuss this. This is a mandatory subject to bargaining as to whether or not you can implement such a policy with your union. So those are high-level thoughts and concerns regarding a mandatory program. What about a voluntary program where the employer says, okay, I don't want to be so draconian or heavy-handed. I think most of my employees are going to say, I'll do this, but I want to give them a nudge. I want to say, okay, to encourage everyone to do it, I'm going to offer a $500 bonus to everyone who gets the vaccine. Well, again, the law would counsel very careful against that, because while employers are permitted to incentivize employees' participation in such programs, those incentives cannot have a coercive effect in practice. And you're going to say, well, what does that mean, Charles? Well, it's kind of like it when you see it. If it really looks like, even though it's an incentive for those to get it, but it's going to be so favorable that it almost looks like a pay cut for folks who don't get it, or if folks are going to be not given certain access, or they're not going to be eligible for promotion, or they're not going to be eligible for transfer to certain work units, that can be found to have a coercive effect. But and if you do offer incentives for folks to get it, it must be provided, that incentive must be provided to employees who cannot participate in the program due to a disability or religious belief that prevents them from undertaking the vaccine program. Another question that, okay, well, if I can require it, that the second question I get is, if I can require it, is it permissible? Is it legally permissible as an employer for me to require my employee to submit some objective evidence, like a vaccine card or a doctor's note, saying that they've been vaccinated? Or is that going to violate ADA strictures regarding inquiries about health conditions, et cetera? And the answer is yes. You may require employees to provide objective evidence that they've been vaccinated if you implement a program like this. The EEOC's recent guidance states that asking an employee to show proof of vaccination is not a disability-related inquiry. However, subsequent questions, such as asking why an individual did not receive a vaccination, may elicit information about disability and would be subject to pertinent ADA standards regarding those queries must be job-related and consistent with business necessity. Now, I would submit that the EEOC's declaration that this was a pandemic, an acknowledgement of so, and that it creates a potential issue in the workplace for employers, that you're probably going to be able to show job-relatedness and having follow-up questions. But I would certainly recommend, treading lightly there as far as how much detail you're going to ask somebody. Usually just yes or no, if you've been vaccinated, is probably good for now as we start to navigate these issues and wait for more guidance from the applicable agencies. Next slide, please. Another legal consideration for the employer is whether to do this themselves. As the vaccine becomes more available, the employer might consider, well, do I want to be involved in distribution? Do I want to have, if I have, for example, a plant nurse, or if I'm a school district and I have a school nurse, do I want to have, once this is widely available and if you can get it, do we want to be doing that? You can. There are issues you have to be careful with, though. You want to make sure that you're appropriately going to do this, and make sure that you're taking the steps to distribute the vaccine and administer the vaccine in a way that's going to be effective. And so a lot of times employers, while they want to say, I want to do this because I want to get it out, I want to make sure everyone's been done, it's often better to leave that to professionals. And so, it's hard to say. If you said, what is your recommendation, Charles? What would you recommend? I would say requiring vaccination, but having it done by an appropriate healthcare practitioner, as opposed to trying to bring that into the workplace and do it at work, would be my recommendation for a couple of reasons. But certainly, if you're set up, if your workplace or facility is set up that you actually have nursing or healthcare practitioners on site that can do this, and it can save you cost, time, money, and it can ensure that you're getting more widespread application of the vaccine, it's certainly something to consider. But right now, we're certainly recommending, for most employers, it makes more sense, and probably most on this webinar, to think about if you're going to implement a mandatory vaccination program or policy, that you do so by saying people should go get it, tell them where to go get it and what they're going to need to do in the way of proof, and bringing it back to you that they've received it. Next slide. Timing, again, I think this is an important one. A lot of folks are ready to jump all over this, and there's no indication yet that the vaccine is going to be widely available in many, many communities. And even if it is, there's going to be a cascade down of who's going to be eligible to receive it. So this is a good time to start planning for and working on a program if you want to implement one. But this isn't something I think you need to get out right now. It doesn't need to happen this week, but you should certainly be thinking about this. Give yourself plenty of time to make sure that you're training your communications folks, your managers, your HR professionals, safety and health professionals regarding how the program is going to work, and absolutely how to look out for and be observing employees' requests for and need for accommodation, whether it's disability or religious, and also making sure that the managers of the company, HR professionals, are hyper-focused on making sure that no one is being retaliated against for asserting rights, whether they be OSHA rights, ADA rights, Title VII religion rights, making sure people realize that they can assert those exceptions to the extent they want to with no repercussions. Certainly a lot of communication around this, the more the better, providing employees with advance notice of the program's requirements, plenty of time to get vaccinated, and obviously an opportunity to ask questions, raise concerns. How you communicate on these issues goes a long way to making sure that you diffuse in advance any legal issues that might pop. And obviously you should be hyper vigilant and continue to monitor guidance from the various agencies that are putting out guidance on this subject. It's not for me. Just a couple of final points to make before I conclude. Think hard about communication plans. Again, working with your folks in employee morale, and also focus on, again, exceptions. It is not necessarily going to be an earth-shattering thing if you can, in your workplace, work with accommodations for folks who cannot get the vaccine, either for religious or disability reasons. There are options that can be undertaken. Certainly things less than vaccination that can still ensure a healthy workforce. But we do know, as Jacob said at the beginning of the program, vaccinations are super effective. They're way more effective than masking, than social distancing. And because we know that there is going to be folks who absolutely can't, get this for whatever reason, disabilities, religion, we have to be very, very thoughtful about these accommodations and making sure that even folks, if we're not going to require it, we're going to still make the folks who cannot get a vaccine really be super, super diligent about other preventive measures. So mask coverings, our masks, face coverings, additional things like social distance, perhaps work from home where it's possible. And also another thing to be thinking about is how you might engage with your workers' comp carrier, let them know that you're going to be implementing this program, and just asking if they have any guidance or issues, because we do know that there, as Jacob said, there is some incidence of side effects. Although when he talked about some of the side effects, I think I have 4 of them already: aches, pains, joint issues, headaches, but I think that's just from dealing with the pandemic for the last 10 months. But, you know, people may have side effects, and some may even say that this is a work-related occurrence, and it would be to the extent that you mandate vaccination and somebody has a side effect for it, or God forbid gets very sick, that would and should be covered by workers' comp. So engaging with your workers' comp carrier and just letting them know you're planning to implement this program and seeing if they have any guidance or instructions on how you might provide notice of potential side effects or claims and how they're handling it would be a good preventive thing to do as well. And that's all I have as far as my remarks, and I'll turn it back to the host.
Very good. Thank you so much. And I apologize, my internet connection dropped there for a hot second, but it looks like we got that slide up and running. So let me just remind folks, you can submit questions right now through the webinar tool. We do have a few, and I want to address those now. We had a couple of questions that asked about, hey, can I mandate this? And I think you addressed that very well. Another question here said, how would California be treated? They are protected by the state for almost everything. Are there special implications with California in mind?
Yeah, I'll take that one. So we've actually been doing a fairly comprehensive sweep and survey of all 50 states to find out what they're doing in this space. And we have reviewed a number of states, including California, Colorado, Florida, Illinois, Michigan, Ohio, which seem to be the most proactive in this space and really seem to be looking at and proposing potential regulations or legislation around this. And thus far, we've not found any material departures from how federal law is approaching this. So, you know, I don't think California is looking at this any different right now, other than, one, accommodate folks who have disabilities, two, accommodate folks who have bona fide religious-based reasons to refuse it, and three, accommodate folks who just say, I think California is going to give them the ability to say, look, I think it's early, it's emergency use, and I don't want to take this. And you're going to need to be prepared to engage with folks who raise those concerns. And in every single circumstance, those three type of circumstances, particularly for California-based employers, you absolutely must engage with your counsel. Don't freelance on this. Don't guess at it. Don't be a Google lawyer. Get help from counsel. Make sure you're getting wise and thoughtful advice on this, because it's one of the most difficult jurisdictions to be violating an employment law in, just because of the potential exposure. You know, there are things popping. So, I mean, for example, I mentioned Colorado as a jurisdiction. I don't know if anyone's on here, but Colorado actually has statutes requiring accommodation of pregnancy and pregnancy-related medical conditions as it relates to vaccination, similar to those that we've discussed today for disabilities and religious objections. So every state's unique. Every state has its own little quirks. And so, again, before you implement a program like this, particularly in high-risk jurisdictions like California, I don't mean to be pejorative, but, you know, a high-risk jurisdiction like California, New York, Ohio, et cetera, that are a little bit more progressive with respect to their employment laws, it's always worth engaging with counsel.
All right, very good. Thanks so much for that question and that answer. Another question says, would proof of antibodies, meaning the employee already had COVID, suffice as an exemption from the mandatory vaccination program?
Yeah, that's a great question, and it's not the first time I've been asked it. And our advice is generally if you're going to implement a mandatory vaccination program, to still require those who have presence of the antibodies or have got an antibody test and it shows that they're positive for the antibodies, to still have the vaccination. The research is still not 100% clear as to whether or not someone who has the antibodies can nonetheless pass COVID-19. And so for that reason, I don't know what I would recommend it, but I think I would still consider, if you're mandating the vaccine for everyone in the workplace, I would require it for everyone in the workplace, subject to the exceptions we've said today. Otherwise, you're going to get a whole bunch of people saying, well, I don't want to get it, I have the antibodies, and then it's going to be, what antibody test is good, what antibody test is bad, which one are we recognizing, which one are we not? And if somebody's got the time to go in and get an antibodies test, they probably got the time to go in and get a vaccination. So for now, you know, our guidance to employers is, you know, if you're going to implement a mandatory vaccination program, it should be for everyone, including those who have already who've got a positive antibodies test.
Very good. Thanks again for that question. Another one here says, can you comment again on incentives that would be required for people who have convictions that prevent them from getting the vaccination if we also provide incentives for those that do get the vaccine? If the incentives are what are already doing, distancing, masking, working from home, etc., how do we create new incentives for those who don't want to vaccine?
Yeah, so that's a very good question. And this is an area, again, that's very much in flux. So, for example, the Department of Labor recently announced that they're going to be publishing a new rule that's going to require incentives for participating in employer wellness programs to be de minimis, almost small things as opposed to large things, again, so it's not having a reverse coercive effect. And so, follow this carefully. And once that rule is published, I think they're going to ask for stakeholders to comment for a couple of months before the final rule is published. But as far as those who you've got an incentive, even if it's de minimis, or let's say we're going to give a $100 Amazon gift card to everyone who vaccinates. Our advice would be if you've got a handful of folks, 4 or 5 folks who can't because of religious disability reasons cannot get the vaccination, you're going to have to still offer that card to them. It's a term or condition of employment, and you'd be in effect discriminating on the basis of religion or disability to not give that incentive to those folks just because they're unable to get the vaccination.
All right, very good. Thanks again for that. Another question here says, if working in the office is not required, can we enforce work from home for anyone who won't get vaccinated? For example, if you are only allowed in the office with a vaccination.
I'm sorry, do that one more time for me. I was listening, but I don't know that I tracked it.
Yeah, so they're asking if working in the office is not required, can we enforce a work from home for anyone who won't get vaccinated?
Yes. Short answer, yes.
Very good, short and sweet. We like that. All right, another one says, how do you handle employees who refuse to work with other non-vaccinated employees?
Well, that's a great question. I think it's going to really this is going to really test the skill and acumen of your human resource professionals. But again, I think you're going to want to have dialogue with them about why you don't want to work. If it's just one person out of 20 in a work unit or a large production floor in a call center, or I'd want to understand the particular concerns of why this person's concerned. If they don't work anywhere near them, if they're socially distanced, if everyone is masking anyway, which is another point. After everyone's been vaccinated, should employers relax or loosen social distancing and face covering requirements? Our current advice is no. To still require this just for a period of time until we're really where Jacob said, at herd immunity, as opposed to okay, I've been vaccinated, I'm clean, I don't have to wear a mask now. Remember, the initial slides that Jacob flashed up said that the vaccine is going to be about 95% effective. Well, 95% effective still means 5% of folks, it's not going to be effective for, and they may still either catch COVID-19 or transmit it. So I think it's still appropriate for a good time until we're really, really, deep into the vaccination period, really, really deep into where, health professionals at the CDC and state and public health agencies have told us, no, we're there now. We can start relaxing some of these, preventive measures. So I think back to the question, how do we deal with someone who says, like, I'm not working next to Tim, he won't get vaccinated? I want to have a really robust discussion with that person about what their concerns are, whether there's something we can do to further, alleviate concerns. Can we move people around? Can you move John away from Tim 30 feet, or that kind of thing? And it's going to be a very careful conversation to say, look, we are required in some circumstances, to accommodate folks. But here's the rub. Most employees shouldn't know who's had it or not. I mean, if you're following your Americans with Disabilities Act and Title VII guidance, it shouldn't be a widely disseminated, issue or fact that someone has or has not been vaccinated, unless the employee themselves is going around telling people, I didn't get the vaccine because it violates my religious beliefs. Then you're going to have to deal with the issue. But as far as that being a real concern, I would address that when it comes up. It's going to be careful dialogue with that employee, conversations about what you can do to alleviate their concern. But at the end of the day, if they say, well, I know Tim won't get it because of his religious practice, to say, and that's exactly right. We're required to follow federal law on that. But what can we do for you, John, to alleviate your concerns? And then have a dialogue with John about that. I think that's about the best you can do and best I can do with that question. Every one of those circumstances are going to be unique.
Yeah, very good. Thanks so much. A lot of great questions. Again, just a reminder, you can type a question right into the chat box there, and I'll ask it of our presenter. We don't have any others queued right now, so let me just see if there's another 60. Oh, actually, one just popped in. Let me go ahead and read that right now. I have refused to give the vaccine for now as I have severe allergic reactions to the flu vaccine. Unfortunately, I am not a frontline healthcare worker and will probably have no choice in the future and take the risk of having a reaction rather than lose my job. So that's more of a comment, but any thoughts around that?
Yeah, well, a couple things. So number one, if your employer actually requires it and you have an allergic reaction to it, and to the extent that it impacts your ability to work and you can't come in because of the reaction, you're out for a couple of days, maybe a couple of weeks even, you would have the benefit of workers' comp protection for that. You could certainly be eligible for temporary total disability, sometimes what's referred to as TTD, if you have any lingering permanent effects. As a consequence of having been made to take the vaccine, you might have a workers' compensation claim for PPD, permanent partial disability. I think most of the side effects that so far have been shown from the research have been temporary and short-lasting, but there would be protections for you under workers' comp laws as far as getting you paid during that period when you were not able to work if you had an adverse reaction.
All right, very good. Thanks so much for that. Another one came in asking, what is a great source of information about the California specific requirements?
I don't have a link or a resource right at my fingertips, but I will tell you, you can be a Google lawyer on this. And as Jacob said, every state has one of these vaccination plans, and almost all of them include some information regarding what can be mandated versus what cannot be mandated. And so I would certainly look for that state's plan. It's going to generally have their rollout, what we're doing first, who's getting it first, and then it's going to say information regarding who can and cannot. And if I think on the slides our contact information is available. So offline, if once the program concludes, if you would want to email me offline, I would certainly help identify a resource for you, and I can send that to you after the program.
All right, very good. And as a reminder, this session is being recorded, and we'll have it posted to the First.Bank website the next day or two. So let me just pause again, see if there are any last questions, and maybe while we're doing one last check, Charles or Jacob, any quick final thoughts?
Yeah, this is Charles, and then I'll shut up and let Jacob have a couple of thoughts. I think if you join this program today, good for you. Kudos to you. This is not an employment action to be taken lightly. It's going to require some thought. It's going to require some planning and organization. And what I hopefully I emphasized a couple different times is some very good and strong communication with your workforce. You can head off a lot of these issues if you explain the rationale, if you explain the why, if you explain how important it is to make sure that you keep this disease out of your workplace, and how important it is that folks be thinking about vaccination. It's important. So good for all of you for attending today, and do engage with some of the resources that Jacob said are available to folks at the Marsh site. I've read through them myself. They're excellent, very good high-level summaries. And do reach out to your own employment and labor counsel with respect to any of these issues. Don't try to go this alone. Don't freelance on this. Penny wise, pound foolish. Spend an hour of your lawyer's time getting some good advice on this as you're getting ready to roll out one of these programs.
Yeah, and this is Jacob, and I would just echo Charles's thoughts there. Congratulations, thank you very much for being here. It means that you're taking these things seriously, and use the resources that you have with your legal counsel that you have, and also with your benefits team and for the brokers in that space as well. There are some very good resources, as we said before, on our Marsh website that can help you navigate through that. And we are happy to sit down and chat with your HR team and walk through those pieces with them. Just as you know, Charles and I are here to help. And if you have any questions, please feel free to reach out to us and ask any questions. Thank you very much.
All right, thank you. And a couple more questions did just pop in here. Can we make an employee take a COVID test before returning to work, even if they've met the quarantine period requirements?
So, and a little bit more detail on that. Let me assume some facts there. So, I'm assuming that the person's either been exposed or is having symptoms. And in the case where somebody is highlighted and said, yes, I've been exposed to someone who's tested positive, or I'm experiencing the range of symptoms that would be subject to COVID, and they now want to come back into work, and you say, hey, we want you to have a negative test. Yes, you can do that. But a lot of employers are taking the approach that, because of the time, how long it takes to get a COVID test back if they don't go do a rapid, a lot of times it's a lot easier just to let them wait out if they've tested positive, obviously to just wait out the period. But if someone says they were exposed and they've otherwise been isolated and it's been 10 to 14 days, whatever the recommendation is in your current jurisdiction, they're all different, by the way. So I'm not going to give you a hard and fast days. CDC says one thing, the St. Louis County Health Department says something else, the California Department of Health is saying something else as far as what's an appropriate quarantine period. So follow the guidance in your jurisdiction, and that usually can be enough. But if you wanted to require a test, you could, subject obviously to other accommodation issues, that type of thing, people's ability to get it, people's ability to pay for it. So
very good, very good. Okay. Well, it looks like that's all the questions, and I don't want to keep you beyond that. So let me go ahead and just see if there are any more. I think that's it. So let me go ahead and wrap us up. Next up for the Center for Family-Owned Business webinar series, as you can see on your screen, we do have a Paycheck Protection Program webinar scheduled for Friday. We just popped that up, hot off the press. It's going to focus on second draw loans. And again, scheduled for Friday. You can check your email for registration soon. Then on January 21st, we have a session on the 2021 market outlook. And then on January 28th, we'll host our second webinar for our Women-Owned Business series. And that session will discuss wellness and life-work balance. Again, you can find out how to register for those sessions in your inbox from an email from First Bank. I'd like to thank you all for joining us today. A special thank you to Jacob and Charles for their time and expertise. Please do take just a few moments to complete a brief survey that's going to pop up here in a second. It'll help us improve our service to you. With that said, have a great day, everyone. We'll catch you next time.